Welcome to another episode of the CPGGUYS podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CPGGUYS podcast. I'm one of those aforementioned CPG guys. I'm Peter V.S. Bond. I'm also the Vice President of Retail Strategy at Power Reviews. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host. He's an e-commerce luminary. He's an entrepreneur. He is the Bonnie to my Clyde, the Ben to my Jerry, the Pinky to my brain. He and like people like Flea and Pink and even Liberace, he's known by only one name. Please join me in welcoming my co-host, Sri. How you doing today, Sri?
Doing awesome, Peter. Thank you as always. And it's a pleasure to be doing this podcast with you and an honor as well. And here we are. We'll wait for you to tell us who our special guest today is. But this one's in the history book, so I can't wait to get started.
Yeah, and before we do, let me remind our audience that if you want to find any of our content, download on podcast platforms, watch YouTube videos. You can even download a PDF of our favorite podcasts. There's a lot of content. Just go to cpgguys.com. That's cpgguys.com. And if you really would and you like this podcast, do us a favor. Go to tinyurl.com/AppleCPG podcast. That takes you to the Apple platform and give us a rating. We'd really appreciate it. It helps us with our business. Anyhow, so let's get back to our guest today. I've known our guest today for about 15 years. We met in the lobby of the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. We've known each other ever since then, particularly over the last 5 years when he was at the Path to Purchase Institute. He is now the Chief Revenue Officer at a loyalty company called Fetchrewards. And he's a good friend. So please welcome me in joining Patrick Burke. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm great. And honestly, I am thrilled to be here with you guys today. It's, when you guys launched this a couple months ago, it was, I was really interested in it and been tracking you guys ever since. So I'm going to start with just a couple of observations. One, I heard the podcast with Mount, and Peter, you showed up in a Coke shirt. So what that says to me is I haven't sent you guys any swag yet. And I'm going to make sure that I do that immediately afterwards so that we can right that wrong. And then the other thing is the undercurrent or the theme of baseball. There's some coastal bias in the conversation. So I'm proudly representing the Midwest and the Chicago White Sox, who at the time of recording are only one game out of the first place in the division.
And,
all right,
and because you have chosen to bring that up, I will actually do something I normally don't do, which is interrupt the conversation, especially as the guests introduce themselves, and remind Peter of a famous moment from back in 2000. It was a warm summer night in the summer of 2005, and Patrick Burke and Sri were at the then named U.S. Cellular Field, also known as the Comiskey Park now. And Patrick actually took me to my first box seating ever in any sporting arena in the United States. And we watched a Jason Giambi Grand Slam. And I remember distinctly, the Giambino, the Yankees win. 10 innings, walk-off Grand Slam. I'll never forget.
Pulling out all the stops for my friends.
Well, I'm sure we're going to be able, and by the way, Sri never interrupts in any conversation.
Of course not.
You know that, Pat. It's just not his style.
No.
So let's get down. Before we get to the questions, Pat, why don't you give us a little bit of history on yourself and particularly your company Fetchrewards and what they do?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I mean, myself, you mentioned Path to Purchase Institute, and it was a really meaningful 2 years, and it allowed me to establish a lot of relationships, quite frankly, that carry through to today. Get to know you guys even better in probably a different way. And before that, I spent first 18 years of my career at a company called Market Advantage originally, that ultimately became what is Numerator today. I have the gray hair to prove that I've been around the industry and CPG and retail for the past 25 years. And I think over that time, I think all of us, one of the things that is common is kind of a curiosity about what's going on and what's next. And having spent 18 years tracking print promotions, it kind of felt to me like it was time to move on and look for what's next. And the Institute allowed me to open a lot of those doors. Ultimately, one of them was Fetch. Fetch at that point was, startup. Let's just call it what it was, right? And it was a really interesting and unique opportunity to get involved with an organization and help build, right? Help play off to build from the experience that I had gained in the creation of Market Advantage and really learn from those mistakes, leverage relationships that we had. I was impressed with the team that they had there. And quite frankly, I was really just impressed with the fact that it was started by a 20-year-old sophomore in college in Madison, Wisconsin, who decided to look at the industry in a different way. This industry is littered with a lot of well-intended people that do the same thing year over year, because that's just the way it was done before. So when there was an opportunity to flip that on its ear, I quickly joined in, and middle of 2016, and it's been a great run.
Good. Well, let's get into the details here, Pat. We've got a bunch of questions for you,
sure,
and specifically around what Fetch does. So Fetch Rewards, obviously, rewards seems to be around loyalty.
Yep.
Can you tell us how it fits in specifically to the loyalty space? What's your core value proposition? Because your clients are B2B, but you also have a B2C focus. Explain to us how that works and what your proposition is.
Yeah, first question is, how does Fetch fit into the loyalty space? Uniquely, oddly, loyalty is a really good place for it to land. But I would tell you that loyalty is tough, right? Loyalty, if you look at all the major CPG companies, most of which we've worked with in some form or fashion, from Pepsi to Coke to Huggies to P&G to Kellogg, everybody's tried to stand up a loyalty program of some sort and have met varying degrees of success. What we found when we looked at the space, when we were approached to do that with one of our first partners, is that loyalty's tough. Loyalty's tough. Loyalty's expensive, right? The cost of acquisition on your first user compared to 20 plus million users, it's like a hockey stick, and it's certainly not the growth one, it's an expense one. And the other thing I think you realize with loyalty is that it ends up being a situation where you end up talking to yourself. The people that are going to contribute, that are going to try to get those rewards, are actually people that are already buying your products. And to get to a meaningful reward, you've got to buy a lot of those products, right? Because there's no individual CPG company, P&G even, that represents enough of consumer purchase to be relevant across the broader sense of their purchase behavior. And so after we were approached to do it, we basically went back to that partner and we said, look, we think it's interesting. If 20 million people are willing to sign up for one of the most successful programs ever, there's something there, but we think the approach needs to be different. And so what we'd like to do is bring you in, give you exclusivity, and then go out and find additional partners that will extend exclusivity so that we have multiple billion-dollar brands, not tens, dozens of multi-billion-dollar brands that were going to allow us to connect with consumers through that exclusivity and creating a retail agnostic environment. We have the ability to connect with predominantly mom, that's just the math, whenever and wherever she shops, and we can be more relevant. Relevance is really the key for everything that we do.
So Pat, hold on a second. Is that logo on your shirt an Aramark logo, or is that Dallas Cowboys?
No, it's a golf club.
It's a golf club. I'm like, what happened? He changed loyalty, because that's what we do on this podcast. We talk sports the entire episode. In an era of loyalty, where the new Walmart Plus program is seen as a loyalty building program, not necessarily as a competitor just to Amazon Prime, but to hook more consumers in and reward them with a bunch of benefits and perks. And you have register receipts, which creates loyalty and rewards. You have rebates. There's a ton of digitally available rebate programs. How does this application actually work? And then how is it different from all these other reward-based, loyalty-based incentive ecosystems that actually exist?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I'll break it down in a couple of different ways. And one, I mean, there's a lot of the retail specific loyalty programs. And I mean, these are programs that brands are and should be invested in, right? You need to support your retail partners. But at the end of the day, your retail partners are the loyalty they're looking for is to them, right? And your brand is part of driving that loyalty. But they'd be just as happy if you buy their private label, their own brand offering. Whereas that doesn't help any of the national brands that are looking to stand out and differentiate themselves over time. A lot of the other comparisons, I would say, are digital incentive platforms. So, you have your traditional FSIs that were out there. Those are replaced by a host of digital incentive platforms, but they don't do anything but encourage the same switching behavior or race to the bottom. And our feeling I'll go back to exclusivity. Our feeling that offering exclusivity and the ability to connect on the basis of the first party data that our users are willing to share and knowingly share, that we were going to have the ability to leverage that data to provide them the ability to target and connect with mom wherever mom was shopping and whenever mom was shopping. It's an always on platform. Our fundamental belief was that it was going to be easier to get mom to go up or down one shelf, right to left on one shelf, than it would be to go for a single item at an individual store, right? Be relevant, connect with her where she is, wherever she wants to shop. So a unified platform for loyalty for the brands first.
And Patrick, just to clarify for our listeners, when you say exclusivity, you're referring to a brand within a category that they get exclusive first tips?
Yes. So if we've got a diaper manufacturer or carbonated soft drink brand, those have exclusivity on the platform. They operate in a world where they're effectively the only product on the shelf. There is no private label. There is no competitive brand that's present or they will get rewarded on. There is no switching out. That's very, very fundamental to what we do. It's always on, regardless of whether they're promoting at that period of time or not.
So I heard a little bit about exclusivity. I heard a little bit about coalition. Can you frame out a little bit more about why a brand would choose to work with you versus other types of investment options? I heard you talk about FSI. I heard you talk about retailer. Is it a mix issue? Is it an either or? And is also, where are you tapping into the budget? Because Sri and I always talk about above the line, below the line.
Sure.
I'm assuming this fits more into the national marketing budget than it does against a specific retail budget, correct?
Yeah, so I think that, so the answer is a lot of the above. It just really depends. As you both know, having worked in multiple organizations, what I would say is there aren't a lot of either ors, right? People have to be thoughtful about the investment decisions that they're making. And I think I mentioned it, but our brands are still going to invest with their retail partners. And that makes all the sense in the world. You need to support them and ultimately to get their support and shelves and end caps and all the things that we know and love. But where we're differentiated and where these brands are coming to us is that the exclusive nature of what we do, the retail agnostic nature of what we do, and the fact that we share this first party data with them, and the fact that our scale, when we started in January of 17, kind of effectively fall off the back of a turnip truck, and we've got 20 users that are Fetch users and a couple of innovation people from our partner. As we scale up to 5.5 million active users, it gives us scale. It gives us the largest addressable audience that they own, and they've got the ability to activate in a way and connect with shoppers based on behavior, not what they said they were going to do, not what they might do, but what they actually did. And therefore they can drive efficiencies and greater effectiveness. And so that's where we win a lot of coin flips when it comes to where those investment dollars should go. Go ahead. I wanted to answer Peter's second question, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Patrick. No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, from where do the investment dollars come from? A whole bunch of places, right? So consumer incentive budgets, trade budgets, team budgets that are in the local markets, right? It really, there are a host of, we get from data and research. One of the things that I like is that we've got a bunch of different areas within the businesses that we work with. It adds layers of complexity too, but ultimately we've got a lot of different constituents that we can work with and partner with.
Hey, Patrick, I was saving this question for later, but I'm going to move it up because we just mentioned one of my favorite areas, which is somewhat alluding to media and brands, and it comes from trade budgets. You know, Fetch Rewards is bang square in the middle of loyalty and rewards at the end of the day. More rewards than loyalty than anything else at the end of the day, which means you're creating a gravity and a pull as a magnet more towards building brand equity. Why is this not in a media mix-based ecosystem and a partnership with brands? Why is it a commercial selling partnership of trade rates? Just
So what I would,
my humble belief, Patrick, when I ask you that question, I also ask it from a lens. My humble belief, while working at J&J with the financial accounting boards of New York, is anything that's trade is an actual price discount to the consumer. And anything that is not should really belong in the media line that incents commercial growth of any sort. And isn't Fetch Rewards better off going down that path?
you know, I think maybe, and it's part of the conversation that we're having now with our scale. When you're talking about 100,000 or 500,000 or even 2 million users, you didn't have the right representation to be able to do that. So more often, we're working with our partners, and we're starting to become a bigger media consideration when it comes to the eyeballs that we have, that we attract, and certainly the market that we can address.
Hey, Pat, you mentioned a number, 5.5. I want to kind of dig into that a little bit about, is that a total number? Is it monthly active? How do you measure that? And then the other thing I'd like you to do, because we really haven't touched about it, we've kind of referred to it. Walk us through the user experience. What do they have to do to get that reward? What are you collecting, and how is that meaningful to the brands?
So I'm going to go in reverse on that, because I think
by all means,
I think answers the second. So Fetch Rewards, download App Store, Google Play, wherever you get your apps, completely free app. What we do when we welcome a new user into the app is we quickly introduce them to the fact that there's 300 plus brands available to them. 300 plus brands is kind of daunting, right? And so what we quickly do is we coach them into taking a picture of their receipt or submitting electronically one of their digital transactions, be it from Amazon or whatever digital platform. It could be Walmart, it could be Target, etc. But it's completely agnostic regardless of channel. So we quickly coach them into that behavior. And then what that does is it starts the personalization engine. Basically, every transaction that you submit lets us know, lets our brand partners know a little bit more about you so that we can serve up content that's relevant to you, right? So Peter, I saw the picture of you having your laptop on top of the diaper boxes a couple weeks ago.
Where it is right now.
You're going to get promotions for diapers, right? And you're going to get greater discounts or greater incentives if you're purchasing from a competitive brand versus our partner, right? Shri and I, fortunately, are past that stage unless Shri's got news. So we're not in that category. We're not going to see diapers, right? Because it's not relevant to us. And so the experience ultimately becomes like a fingerprint. Everybody's experience with Fetch is different, just based on what you do, who you are, where you are, and the information that you share with us. That relevance, and because it's not a onesie twosie or kind of a one-off kind of engagement, allows our users to get familiar with the brands. Hey, you know what, where they have loyalty to competition of one or two brands, there's 300 other brands where loyalty might be up for grabs. So what we're the always on is effectively a % off that we're giving based on the purchase of a brand partner. And what that does is it starts to create a gamification, if you will. So when you scan that first receipt, what you're going to do is we're going to automatically within seconds put it into a digital receipt that's fed back to you, tells you how many points that you have received. And the next time you buy those diapers, Peter, what you're going to do is you're going to see that you could have earned points by purchasing a partner product. And so we're constantly getting those brands in front of you, and relevant brands based on what you do. That relevance keeps people in the platform. That relevance has translated into those 5.5 million users that on average are submitting 16 plus receipts. I'll appeal to the data geek in the three of us.
Oh, we're there. We're with you.
Those 16 transactions tell us that we're getting Every purchase across every channel, convenience, club, grocery, mass, drug, blind spots that are typically existing in current platforms and in traditional data sources go away because we've got all of that data and we've got permission to share it with all of our brands.
Yeah, let's look back at the old IRI days of consumer panel, right? Convenience was a big blind spot, to your point, because people would consume at the store. They didn't bring an empty bottle home with them at night to scan on their wand and capture. And so convenience data was worthless in the panel. What you're telling me is that that's no longer the issue.
That is no longer the issue. And it's a unified panel, right? It's got every channel. You don't have to source some from one area and some from another. You've got the ability, they've got permission. Again, it all goes back to first party data, right? And our ability
to the numbers. Let's get to the numbers. You mentioned 5.5 million. Break that down for us.
Yep.
You know, when I'm back to panel, right? I'm thinking churn rate, attrition,
sure,
monthly active. Give me some juicy numbers. I'm a data guy, Pat.
So yeah, no, that's great. 5.5. We just kind of go to what is a common and representative, respected third party, which is App Annie, right? It gives us the ability, especially at the scale that we've achieved, to do the comparisons against all of the comparables, right?
Okay.
So where do we stand against any other option that somebody might have to invest? And quite frankly, it gives us the ability to look at people that you normally wouldn't compare yourself against, right? So when I look at monthly active users, which is that 5.5 million, that's one number. But then I also look at weekly active, and you can think about something like Instacart. We have more weekly active users than Instacart right now. So when you think about where eyeballs are,
Stop the press. Repeat that statement. You have more weekly active users than Instacart.
Yes, sir.
That's
for multiple months running.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bravo.
What a big deal. I think to be able to say that itself is a big deal.
You know, honestly, it took a long way to get here, but I think it all goes back to consumer first, focus on brands and committing to those brand partnerships, driving value through through that intersection, and then creating a product, quite frankly, that's fun. You know, if you go to the App Store right now and you look at all of the reviews that we have, the first two words that you're gonna run into are fun and easy. And that's key, right? We're not gonna sit still, but our retention is double any comparable in the space. And it's because of the approach that we took. We believed that would happen, but it's nice to see that it actually has. Those 5.5 million actives are on the basis of 12.5 million downloads. Our retention rate is massive.
That's impressive.
And I'll tell you right now, one thing that we're actively looking, you know, we live in the world that we live in, but the one thing that we don't know is the depth and the length of the recession that we face. I will tell you that we've actually had users, people that have attrited months ago, a year ago, are starting to pop back up into the platform. So older cohorts are starting to re-engage as convenient savings becomes that much more relevant.
Brilliant. Let's jump to brands. We talked about the consumer. By the way, Peter and I come from the same retail 101 school as you, which is if you put the consumer at the center and you always produce products of great quality at value to the consumer, this formula never fails. It's like magic. I wonder why many brands fail if this is the formula. So that's it, Pat. Let's actually go to brands for a second, since we have been speaking about the king and queen here, which is the consumer.
Yep.
Who are your brand partners? How do you find them? Do they come to you? Do you actively look for them? Are there certain categories you'll prioritize for the others? Are there categories this makes no sense whatsoever? Are there categories where there's better value to the consumer versus some others? Just give us the whole brand ecosystem. What's going on there with Fetchrewards?
What I like about that question is not only does Shri reserve the right to interrupt, but he reserves the right to ask like 8 questions just to see if I remember them all.
Packs them all in together.
So brands. Okay, so what you do when you try to stand up a consumer engagement platform like we have is you kind of start in the middle. And the middle, in my definition, is high velocity consumables, right? And so you start with those everyday items that people are going to be engaging with. Because if you have a product that is only purchased once a month or once a quarter, you just aren't going to be able to get people engaged enough to even remember that you exist, right? So you start with high velocity consumables, all the usual suspects. I will say then what you do, and the way that we approached it, and we approached them, right? When we kind of rolled this thing out in January 17, we had one partner, and then we had to look for those brands, those CPG companies that were a little bit more progressive in nature. Not progressive from a political perspective, but companies that were investing in what's next and going forward. And so we approached many of them, and a couple of them came on board right away. And so we were off to the races. But we continued to focus on expanding out that circle and that audience so that we could continue to be more relevant. Our brand partners, which you will I'm not going to mention one because I won't mention them all, and that's probably not fair or probably the right thing to do from a relationship perspective. But if you log into the app, it'll become very clear who our partners are very quickly. They are the number one or the number two brands in all of their categories. Why? Because you've got to be relevant to the people that are using the app, right? There are a bunch of brands that I might like to work with, I think are kind of cool. We've actually introduced a new program where if they're not competing with the national brands that we work with, where we allow some of these smaller brands or categories that are emerging to kind of come in and sample the audience for shorter periods of time. But from a core perspective, we have to be focused on the top brands that are most relevant, that are going to have the biggest impression on our users. So that way we can get the retention that we've just talked about. So they all make sense in that context. I believe that we'll continue to go out from that circle now, right? And so you might have products like batteries that you buy once a year. I think they become relevant at a certain point, and they can leverage all of the weekly purchases that you have from the other brands, right? But they add another point of relevance that keeps the users engaged in the platform. I envision a time where, as our audience grows, apparel, consumer electronics, they are ultimately all consumer purchases. Those aren't new verticals. Those are just products that have different purchase cycles. And ultimately, all of them can or should be participating in the platform.
So Pat, earlier you spoke about what we commonly refer to as the customer journey. You talked about me and my having a daughter that's using diapers, yeah, and how the kind of offers I would see versus what you would see. Walk us through how you build a journey map for a brand, the decisions that they make, what are the components that they have to consider, the reward levels, what have you, and how you help them build a campaign strategy? Because to a degree, it sounds a little complex. I'm sure that you've built a platform to make it easier. Walk us through how a brand works with you to plan a successful campaign.
I think that starts, you haven't heard me use the word client. I've used the word partner a lot. And yeah, that's a really important element to start with. And that partnership, it's reflective of the approach that we've taken. We don't have one-off relationships. We have longer standing, longer term commitments that span not just a month or not just a quarter, but a year and 2 years and so forth. So what that then allows us to do is invest in embedding our team. We've got a multi-person team for each one of our accounts that's reflective of an account leader, an account manager, and given the volume of first-party data, a business intelligence analyst that is working with them, that is focused on their business. We then leverage that part of the relationship to get to understand what the needs are of the individual brands. What's their innovation schedule look like? What are the core elements that they're pushing on? So it allows us to then reflect that into the application and align with the consumer purchase data that we have to make sure that we serve up the most contextually relevant information at that time. And it has the ability to actually move with you, right? And, because 3 years ago, you weren't in the diaper business, right? And your life changed dramatically. But now you need diapers and you need baby food. And at first, you needed infant formula, right? And so we've got the ability, as you give us signals of what's coming in your life. We've got the ability to be contextually relevant, read those signals so that we can serve up the best audience possible. It's not, we've got a massive audience, but it's not about broadcasting to everybody. It's fine tuning it down to the ones that are most relevant to my brand. And then we talk a lot about digital incentives, and that's how you motivate. But at the end of the day, it's not just about digital incentives. It's about messaging. It's about communication. It's about adding value to life, being contextually relevant. And our partners are on that journey. And it allows us to do some interesting things, right? When we've got this relationship. One of the things that we did not envision when we launched this is how much that we would be used for a survey capability, right? Surveys are weak when you're reacting to what people said they were going to do. We can target based on what they did, and so there's a strength there, and our partners are really leveraging that when it comes to product innovation, when it comes to just general impression or sentiment about the brand itself.
Well, when you think about the two big data providers of panel, they use the same 100,000 households. Yep. And their ability to survey that 100,000 is very limited, and you can't get very deep in the purchasing behavior. What I hear you saying is you're more on the retailer end, the retailer loyalty end, in that you have multi-channel transaction data for millions of people. So being able to leverage that and identify first-party data, that becomes extremely, so I can understand why they want to go after your audience to do surveys. That's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing about it, right, and the three of us know this, certainly walking in, is that we're the same person across every retailer that we go to. But every retailer wants us to sign up for their loyalty platform, and that's fine, they should, but there's a disconnect there, a really big one. And you can work with your retail partner, you should work with your retail partner, and they can tell you more about what happens inside their box than anybody else, and that's great. And by extension, they know what you don't do with them. But Peter, there is a couple of retailers that you engage with all the time that sell diapers that have no idea that you have a baby at home. We know, right? Yeah. We know how many of those are going to a different channel. We know how many of them have shifted online. There's a lot of strength in having the continuity of that first party data over time.
Yeah. Hey, Patrick, I'm going to go back to the consumer for 1 second and make this sort of two-part question. And I'm going to go part one, get the answer, go part two after that, because the other one is back on brands.
Yeah.
And the consumer question is, as a consumer, what can I expect from a rewards perspective when I sign up for Fetch Reward? Could you just give us a high-level overview? Am I looking for gift cards? Am I looking for swag? What can I expect? And are they tiers? Like, could you give us, just for the purpose of our audience, what they can gain by signing up for Fetch Rewards and becoming an active member?
Yeah, so Fetch's currency is points. Fetch points are awarded based on purchasing partner products. You're getting a percentage back, and that percentage will fluctuate depending on the priorities of the brands, the companies that we're working with. But you're going to get percentage back all the time on all of their brands. It's an always-on platform. So that surprise and delight moment is around every corner. It keeps the user engaged. After we get to know, at the beginning, we're going to do what I would say are low value incentives to kind of start to coach you into the idea that there's an incentive structure here. And then after we see what you're buying and where you're buying, those digital incentives, those special offers, as we would call them, start to become personalized. And the brands have a unique ecosystem where they can do a lot of A/B testing, right? And they're protected, right? They're protected. Sure. And they can do within Fetch what they can't do in the national market, because you can limit the distribution of any of those incentives. So you start to pick away at what an incentive that's always been, pick on Revlon for a second, because you were just there. You do a lot of those things. You have those programs, those FSIs that are going out. And from time to time, the depth of discount gets greater, not less. So we've got the ability to go into the platform with our brand partners and do Group A, Group B, and is there a substantial difference in response? And we're doing that all the time. We are constantly doing A/B testing against the platform to make sure that our brands are giving the relevant savings to the people, but not to the users, but not necessarily over-incenting them, right? It's not about racing to the bottom. We want to get the right savings to the right people at the right time.
And then Patrick, part B of that question is back to the brands. You've mentioned A/B testing a couple of times. I can only, my mind just thinks of all the different insights that can emerge from a platform like this with the data being collected at the T-log level, aka register level. And keeping that in mind, you've also mentioned diaper quite a few times. Is there a business case study brewing here, A/B testing diapers that Peter and I are sniffing out?
Diapers is just a convenient thing.
No pun intended, by the way, sniffing out.
Diapers is convenient only because I saw the picture of Peter with his laptop on a diaper box. But you know, I think what you're getting to is, you know, how do we, what are some of the best practices? What are some of the ways that we work with our partners? And actually, one of the things that the onset of the pandemic really allowed us to do is look at first party data in a different way, right? So when we kind of got into that second week of March, when everything went up for grabs and people were going into the store begrudgingly, maybe, and they were going and they were picking things off of the shelf, not based on a brand, but they were buying a category and they were buying what was there. What that led to was an unprecedented amount of trial, right? And a bunch of product introductions that happened naturally as a byproduct of the pandemic. So we then go back and we peel it back a little bit for our brand partners, and we have the ability to evaluate who are new entrants into the brand, new entrants into the category, who are those that you lost. And then as the dust has settled, what it's allowed us to do is put together marketing programs that are aimed to keep new trialists into the program.
Yep.
And on the flip side of that, people that strayed, their loyalty went somewhere else, how do I bring them back along? So it becomes a two-prong attack. And I think that's one of the, if I look at one type of analysis that we've done that's been most successful, most broadly, that is definitely in the team photo. Otherwise, it becomes as diverse as the brands and the products that we have. We do a lot of work around product innovation. That actually, we were kind of picking away at sampling a couple of years ago. Sampling is now a massive undertaking as part of the platform, because, you know, when do you envision somebody standing at the end of the aisle giving away samples again? They're not. We've got the ability to put relevant innovation in front of people on the basis of the fact that they're in the category or adjacent to the category. Not only do we put it in front of the right audience, we see who bought it. We have the ability to survey them. And most importantly, we have the ability to see if they went back and repeated. Trial and repeat. And we can do that all day.
So I'm again, there's a part C that's evolved in my mind before Peter gets to the last question.
He's interrupting with another question, Pat.
So if I'm a user and I want to sign up for Fetch Rewards, how easy is this to do and how easy is this to execute? Is this me filling a form on a website and then I'm good to go, and then all I got to do is anytime I get to a point of sale, I take my receipt and use my smart device and I'm done? Is it that simple?
It is that simple. We make the barrier, we make that hurdle to get in as low as we can do, right? We've got to have age gating and state gating, right? We've got BevAl partners and we've got, you know, we want to make sure that we do all the right things, but we capture a minimal amount of information, then we allow the users to kind of contribute information as they progress along. But it's very simple. You just download Fetch Rewards, you go shop wherever you shop, you take a picture of your receipt, we reward you the points. I didn't answer one of your 8 questions earlier, which was how do those points translate out? That currency, the way to make it really easy was to leverage that currency out into digital gift cards. Hundreds of different options, ranging from a trip to the salon to retail gift cards. And, you know, life's changed a little bit, but what I would tell you is that one of the most rewarding things for us is feedback from the users about how they're using those points and how they're using those gift cards. And you know, mom looks at shopping as a job, right? And a lot of the feedback that we get, the majority of moms, they're taking the opportunity to treat themselves with that gift card, to make that gift card something that is a payoff for something that they have to do. And, you know, we didn't envision that. And quite frankly, that's it's really rewarding when that happens. The other thing that we didn't really talk about, but on the topic of users, is our users and our brands are of equal inspiration to us from an innovation perspective. And within the first 100 receipts, I'm not even kidding, within the first 100 receipts we received in January of 2017 was a McDonald's receipt. And we kind of looked at it and we said, okay, they just didn't get it, right? But it didn't stop. So they kept submitting restaurant receipts because users weren't looking at it as life in retail like the three of us were. It's life of food, right? Yeah. And so what we did is we launched a restaurant vertical earlier this year. We brought on a former CEO of CKE to lead that vertical and help us with international expansion, because not for nothing, I'll admit it, I haven't run a multinational billion-dollar brand before. He has. So you just try to surround yourself with good people, take inspiration from your users, and I think that if we continue to do that, continue to keep our focus where it should be, we'll continue to grow.
Peter, did he just tell us about what's next for Fetchrewards?
He's going to probably tell us a little bit more, but before we get to Shree's last question, you brought up the elephant in the room, Pat. No, it's not the Tampa Bay Rays. It's the pandemic.
Yeah.
And you talked about the behaviors that people were doing during those first couple of weeks. I know when I would make a run to the Mariano store when I was living in Chicago, there was a lot of out of stocks. I was grabbing whatever I could get. And I certainly wasn't opening up my mobile app to see what was on deal that week. I was just trying to get in and out of that store. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about what you were seeing from your end in terms of your users and the brands and their willingness. Because I got to imagine a lot of brands saying, why am I trying to promote when I don't even know if my product's on the shelf? How has that changed since the beginning of the pandemic too?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a good point to double click on. I mean, I think we saw all the things that you would have expected, right? We saw fewer trips, we saw bigger baskets, right? I think that was going to be pretty common, or that was to be expected. We talked about the trial, and obviously your example. You're not looking for deals. You're just looking for products that you need to bring to your house. You want to get in, you want to get out. We have brand partners that, quite frankly, didn't have the need. They can't get toilet paper onto the shelf. By definition, they don't need to plug in. They don't need to push demand, right? Because they don't have any supply. And so, we just really, we as an organization just kind of said, okay, let's kind of land. Where are we today? Got really good relationships with these partners. What do they need from us right now? And what they needed from us right then was just an understanding in real time of what people were doing and where, and how can we react to that. And so what I would tell you is that our brands looked at it not from a basket building perspective, not from a trial perspective, but really just wanted to lean in and communicate to the people, the users of the application. Look, we know that our products might not be available, but when they are, we're going to reward you back with a higher percentage. So it wasn't a demand driver as much as it was a loyalty play. And they really pulled those levers to say, we're with you. And it was really meaningful. And so, it was, March and April were lumpy. And I think they were a little bit lumpy for everybody. And we were just kind of figuring it out. But I would tell you that what it allowed us to do is to deepen our relationships with our users, with our brands to our users, and then with us to our brands. And I think in a couple of different ways. One, just by being willing to have the conversation. Two, look at us right now, right? We're sitting in our home environment. The three of us are social people by nature, and we would love to be sitting in the same room with one another, across the table from one another. But those are conference rooms. They don't tell us anything about one another, right? And the White Sox or the Green Bay Packers or the Rolling Stones, like, you just don't know that about me in that kind of context. So we've been able to get to know our partners a little bit better, and it's been a really good thing for our business and for our relationships. Thrilled. We didn't have to lay off one person as part of this, and in fact, our business has grown. We've we've brought on dozens of new people to help support that growth. We've brought on 6 new partners. I mean, we brought on 2.3 million new users since March 14th. It's the pandemic is something that none of us would have wanted. But I think if you just try to do the right thing by your people, your users, and your partners, you can succeed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all about converting adversity to advantage. So congratulations on having done that successfully the last few months. The one thing I want to remind all our listeners is, our show, the CPG Guys, is anchored on omni-channel, and we tend to talk a lot about e-commerce, which is clearly an area where there's a lot of buzz, excitement. But as we spoke to David Buckingham in a previous episode, the CEO of Acribo register receipts and marketing via register receipts, we kind of re-stressed about how the store model was, is, and will be a largest part of retail. I'm reminded of that when I speak to you again, the importance of register, having the actual receipt in your hand. And just to mention casually for all our listeners, here on the CPG Guys, this is not just about e-commerce. This is about end-to-end retail. And we got a ton of content coming up on the store business model as well. Of course, the anchor these days being omnichannel. And with that, the last question for you, Pat, today is, you kind of alluded to what's coming up next on the restaurant side for Fetchrewards. What else is going on at Fetchrewards is exciting these days that consumers can look forward to and brands can as well?
Yeah, I mentioned, we've gone into truly omni-channel, right? When we launched, it was more just kind of receipts that you could hold in your hands, and we've been able to connect Amazon and across all channels, whether it's in store, click and collect, or just in your traditional online purchase. We are expanding in terms of restaurants, right? And becoming share of stomach. I mean, ultimately, if you want to tease that out, you're going to start thinking about share of wallet, which I think becomes another important consideration. International expansion is certainly on the radar, and we're working with our partners, and we're really, we're following our business into the markets that are addressable by a technology like the one that we provide. There's a lot of room to run, even before we leave the 50 states that we have in terms of brands. At the end of the day, we want to have not just a partner in every aisle, but a partner in every category, because that's ultimately what's going to make us most relevant to all of the users that continue to come onto the platform.
Well, I want to remind all of our followers who are listening to the podcast today that you should go and visit cpgguys.com, because if you go there, you're going to find a link to the audio podcast on 15 different platforms. You'll find a link to the podcast and YouTube video. You can find our list of our favorite podcasts to listen to. You can find our profiles on LinkedIn. You can find our Instagram page, our Twitter page, all of this, cpgguys.com. And if you like what you heard today and you like what you've been hearing all along, can you just go to tinyurl.com/Apple CPG podcast. Give us a star rating, and if you want to also write a review, because it means a lot to us. It's great feedback for us and helps us promote our podcast. I really want to thank our guest, Pat, for coming today. Pat, you filled us with just a wealth of information, more than I even expected, and I'm going to be following up with you on a couple of things. But it was really great, and I'm looking forward to the day that you and Sri and I can go out to White Sox Park. It keeps changing names. I don't know what it is now. It's like
Mesquite Park.
No, it's that's so 3 names ago, Sri. I don't.
Oh, am I out of date?
Yeah. But anyhow, we'll go there for a dog and a beer, and we look forward to getting together with you. So thanks a lot for joining us today, Pat.
Absolutely, thanks for having me. It's been fun to catch up.
And to my journeyman on this adventure, Sri, always fun. Another just stellar episode. This was great content.
Thank you, Peter. And it's always a pleasure when we can have an industry veteran like us, who we've grown up together last 15 odd years in CPG and retail. It was a pleasure to have you, Pat.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a lot of fun.
So everyone, thank you for joining us. We look forward to you having us on the next episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Have a great day.